change in a society is usually persona non grata with those who have been the beneficiaries of the system. Welcome to On the Record. My name is Ebony McMorris. I am the White House Correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks. And on this podcast, we break down policies, power moves, and political plays that are helping to shape America, but in particular, Black America. I'm going to hit you with the fact. In just 1 week, 36 executive orders signed, many of them directly impacting Black communities. That's a power move at lightning speed. But the problem is, if you don't know what's happening, you can't fight back. That's why today we're putting you on the record with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's new executive order tracker, a game-changing tool designed to decode these policies in real time and show you exactly what's at stake. And joining me, I'm so glad to have with us, Dr. Jonathan Cox. He is Vice President of the Center for Policy Analysis and Research at CBCF, and he's breaking down what these executive orders really mean and why they matter for Black America, and how this tracker is putting power back in our hands. Welcome, Dr. Cox. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Ebony. It's good to be here with you.
Absolutely. There's a site that I follow that looks at how many days we have left with this administration. Mm-hmm. We're at 1,408 days left. 52 minutes and 59 seconds. Right. As of this interview. And we've seen out of the 300 objectives in Project 2025, we've seen 97 put forth. 48 are still in progress, but we also see them being beaten in the courts. CBCF now has this amazing tracker that I'm so glad you all have. Break down what it is and why CBCF thought it was necessary to do this.
Sure. So, as you're saying, there's a lot of movement right now from the Trump administration to enact a lot of policies that are radically changing the way our federal government work, and subsequently the lives of everyday Americans, right? People all over the country. And so the CBCF, what we wanted to do was provide a space to be able to dig into how some of these impacts are going to be happening for Black Americans in particular, right? And so we developed this tracker as a way to focus on a certain subset of the executive orders, right? We know that there have been over 80 of them coming out so far, so we're not tracking every single one, but the ones that have particular implications for Black communities. And so we're tracking 17 of these executive orders currently, right? There will likely be more to come as more executive orders are dropped. And we wanted, again, to follow what was happening with these, how they're going to impact Black communities, and be able to break down for people what the executive orders are. A lot of people just simply don't know what they are, don't understand the language that they're written in. So we wanted to make it very plain, and we wanted to give a status update on the executive orders for people to know what are the legal challenges to them. Are they in effect? Are they not in effect? Have they been rescinded? Just as those continue to change and update every day, sometimes multiple times per day. And we wanted to also be able to let people know what members of the Congressional Black Caucus are doing in response to these, and are saying in response to these, in efforts to continue to help support and stand up for communities of color, Black people, and Americans more broadly.
Before we get deep into it, where can people go? They're like, you know what? I'm all right. Where is this tracker? Where do I go?
Sure. You just go straight to our website, cbcfinc.org. On that website, one of the front page banners you'll see is a link to this particular tracker. That's where you can find this tracker and all of our other research and resources that we have available.
So let's talk about some of these orders that you've been following closely, specifically, affecting Black America. What do you see? Which ones do you see are the most detrimental, that are causing some of the most harm in communities?
Sure. And so it's interesting because, again, we're tracking 17 of them currently, right? What we're seeing is that it's not just any one of these executive orders that is problematic, particularly for Black communities. It's all of them. And it's the totality of them together that are really shifting the landscape, right? And so we're looking at things that are related to educational access, to healthcare access, right? all of these are really vital issues for Black communities. And we want to make sure that people understand the impacts on community justice, on their economic advancement and opportunity for Black Americans, right? We know that Black Americans have historically been left out of the policies in America that have created the middle class, particularly the white middle class. Our wealth is significantly less than almost every other group, in particular white Americans. And so these executive orders are going to have real life implications for Black people in terms of how they can stay in the game, they can get up to raise themselves up, to be able to be a part of American society in these ways, right? And so we're tracking all these because we know they have vital importance.
Now, I will let people know if they go to the website, like literally on the front page, you all have the tracker right there and you can click on
Yes,
it.
right
And
there.
I've been able to
Mhm.
go through it a little bit. When you go through, you'll see the different areas like civil rights, like you said, criminal justice, environmental justice, health, immigration, and transportation. And when you go there, there'll be a summary of that executive order and the status of that order and what areas it's affecting. One area that I do want to ask about is one that has been used almost weaponized,
Mm.
which is diversity, equity, um, uh,
And
Lord,
inclusion,
uh,
all of
and
it.
right, and
DEI
inclusion.
and inclusion,
Diversity,
right.
equity, and inclusion, because I don't want to say DEI. I want to use exactly what the words are:
Yep,
diversity,
exactly.
equity, and inclusion. That many people didn't realize this wasn't just about race and gender. This affected veterans. This affects those who were disabled. So many people. We've seen
Mhm.
80,000 veteran positions just slashed. Thank God even for the orders that came down from the 20 attorneys general that sued, and a judge has just overturned some of these firings that have happened. But when we look at DEI, what are the effects that you are seeing?
Sure. I mean, and again, you've named a couple of them that are really, really important, right? Just impacts to the workforce, right? People are losing their jobs, right? Their livelihoods to be able to support their families, to be contributors to the American society, right? Beyond that, what we're seeing are major implications on educational systems, the information that people are learning in school, right? We know that our schools are quite behind, generally speaking, with regards to global education. And this has been something that we've been fighting for years now, right? Where people are trying to take away or even change the ways in which we're learning about core history for the United States, right? Which includes obviously the enslavement of Black Americans, their contributions to society, to building this America that people are saying they want to be great again, right? So we're seeing that happen because any and everything that is connected to people of color, racial and ethnic minorities, just disenfranchisement of folks throughout history is being targeted and excised from what is being taught to people in education. So that is one of those major things that we're seeing with regards to that diversity, equity, and inclusion, on top of the people losing their jobs, and on top of, again, all the other impacts that go beyond just those, right? So it's quite frustrating. It's something we've been fighting for many, many years, and decades, even if we think about it outside of the particular name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's really
Yeah.
quite problematic.
What are some of the other most critical orders that you see that are affecting Americans?
Sure.
And it's
So I
hard
mean,
to
again,
rank it, right? Because
it is.
it is very hard to rank it, but are there some that you all literally like have a bullseye on?
Yes, I mean, obviously, we're looking at the ones specifically for diversity, equity, inclusion. Those are big ones, right? We're also looking at some of the ones like on loan forgiveness, because
Ah,
again, when we think about the fact of wealth in this country, a big reason that Black people in particular do not have the same level of wealth is because we are disproportionately strapped with student loan debt, right? When it comes to getting into college, getting advanced education, being able to get access to that and to have money to be able to pay for that, right? The Black people are a large proportion of those that receive federal funding for schools. And so, right, to end programs that would help with loan forgiveness is something that's going to continue to strap people with ongoing debt for the rest of their lives, which means they can't progress socioeconomically.
there's been a lot of discussion around immigration policies affecting Black and Brown communities. In that area, what do you think we should be watching for?
Sure. So interestingly, right, we had another piece of work that we released recently, which was a survey that we did. We did pre-election survey last year with some folks connected to CBCF and Black Americans, and then a post-election survey. And interestingly, pre-election, Black people really weren't saying that they were, particularly concerned about immigration.
Right.
Post-election, however, a significant proportion of our respondents in that survey said that they are really, really concerned about immigration. What you're also seeing, again, when you think about the Trump administration attacking things like birthright citizenship, which was in many ways founded to ensure that formerly enslaved Black Americans were able to be US citizens, right? We're seeing people who are very concerned about their citizenship status or the status of those that they love, friends, and family, right? And so this is something that is increasingly becoming important for Black Americans.
Let's talk about the other work that CBCF is doing, and then also, CBC. A lot of people
Mhm.
are CBCF is nonpartisan, um,
Yes.
but I know that there been a couple of meetings with Black media and other organizations to talk about other work that you all are doing. What
Mhm.
does that work look like?
Yeah, so I mean, we're doing a ton of work at the foundation, right? Again, we obviously we are in support of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, right? So one of the things that we love about this particular tracker is that we have more than 50 statements from over 30 CBC members that are highlighting the executive orders, their responses, and consequences for their Black constituents and Americans beyond that, right? So we're really, really happy about that. Beyond that, some of the work we're doing, right, is really just trying to provide information that helps to educate the public about issues that are critical to Black communities. And then, as well as that, inform policy, right? We want to have an impact on policy because we know that when we uplift Black Americans with successful and inclusive policy, that actually uplifts everybody else in the country. Everybody does better when Black Americans do better. And so we have, ongoing reports that we're putting out. We had a voting rights scorecard that we put out last year where we looked at 15 states with the largest Black populations along many different things like early voting, voter ID laws, et cetera. We had a fact sheet that we released last year about Project 2025 because we know that that is part of the administration's plan right now is to
It is
implement
the
that,
whole plan.
that they
I
are
I'll
moving
say
on.
it. When we saw the education department being slashed in half, over
Mhm.
1,300 jobs lost, I literally went on air and told everyone we are on page 316 of Project 2025.
Yes,
Follow
exactly.
along to know you don't even have to have a crystal ball to know what is coming down the line. And some of the same authors of Project 2025 are now in office, are your secretaries. Vice
Mhm.
President J.D. Vance, who actually helped write the forward to Project 2025. So the script is here.
It
I feel like your
is.
tracker is bringing us along a kind of proofreading whether this is happening and this is where we are.
Exactly right. And that's part of the intention of this tracker was knowing that this was something that was going to be attempted to be implemented. We're seeing that happen now, right? With all these executive orders that are coming down, a lot of them are meant in many ways to either advance the efforts of Project 2025 or in some ways to serve as like distraction, right? You're flooding the zone with all these different things that are happening, knowing that a lot of them maybe are not going to get through, but you can still sneak through other policy changes that are going to have significant impacts. And we're seeing that disproportionately they're impacting low income Americans, people of color, Black Americans, right? So it's very targeted in terms of what's happening.
Do you see any that I would call like sleeper executive orders that we're not paying attention to? One that I have been really looking
Mhm.
at is environmentalism. All of with the EPA being drawn back, that's big to me because I think about, especially in southern regions of our country, Black Americans living in the South, living in areas that are like cancer zones, and all the
Mhm.
protections that they had and still had to push for the policy to be implemented. I think about how that is affecting their well-being, their life, their health. I think about that. I also think about heirs property. I think about, what's being built in their very backyard now that this administration wants to make legal. To me, the environment is an issue we don't talk about as much, but it is extremely detrimental what some of these policies may have. Are there any other areas that you feel like maybe need to even be spoken about even louder?
Sure. I'm glad you brought that one up because I think that was one of the main ones that we're looking at as well, right? Since we're focusing a lot on issues of health, broadly speaking, for Black Americans this year within the foundation's work, that is a clear and present danger, as you're saying, right? In terms of rolling back some of these protections, because then that means then that we'll see increased, building of things that are going to have negative health impacts on Black Americans, rural Americans, right? Again, people across the South, and other places across the country. So that is something that's problematic. And I think connected to that would be the executive orders that are demonstrating negative impacts on the infrastructure plans that have been happening, right? When we think about the
Mm.
bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed under the Biden-Harris administration, right? A lot of that money was designated specifically to go to communities of color, right, or
Yep.
underserved communities across the
It
nation.
was supposed to help challenge what happened during redlining. We saw
Exactly, right?
during the
To
Biden
create some new
administration,
things. Yep. And
all
so we're seeing that
96
being pulled back.
agencies. Hmm.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that being rolled back. And we're, again, the even it's connected to other executive orders and other action that's being happening, right? The dismantling of the federal workforce is also going to have implications, right? So even if you're not rolling back that specific legislation, if you take away all the people that are going to enact it and get that money out to these places, then it means that it's not going to happen as much as it should, and these communities are going to continue to be underserved.
Before we kind of come to the end of this, you brought up something that I feel like people need to pay attention to, and I would love for you to talk about this because you guys were doing, research on voting rights while all of this is happening, and we're trying to juggle all of it, compartmentalize it, figure out what, it's all important, is that we are also seeing the continued rollback of voting rights.
Yes.
When we talk about the previous election, how this person got in, how this other person didn't get in, I feel like what gets lost in the sauce is that we saw millions of Americans taken off voter rolls. And while it may
Mhm.
not hit mainstream media, you still have states right now that are still trying to pass rules and regulations that will keep people away from voting. I don't care if you red or Republican or Democrat, it is affecting all of America, but it is not an issue that we talk about very often right now. And I don't want to wait
Yes.
till it gets to the primary.
Absolutely. Right. And so, I mean, that's something that we're continuing to track. I mentioned our voting rights scorecard from last year, which looks at those 15 states with the highest Black populations. And so it literally gave a scorecard of the voting rights, right? So are there strikes against or limitations on early voting, or are there restrictive voter ID laws? How is felony disenfranchisement working? Disinformation campaigns, right? And so it gives comprehensive information about these states because that's what we saw, right? We know that during this last election, presidential election, there was a low amount of voter turnout, particularly for Black Americans, right? Even though the ones that voted very highly for Vice President Harris in her run, and we know that a part of that was all these efforts to make it much more difficult for Black people to vote, right? The repealing of parts of the Voting Rights Act really have detrimental effects, and then we're still trying to piece out and figure out exactly what those impacts were and how that had an impact on the election we just saw. Looking forward again to the midterms that are coming up, we want to make sure we're not in a bad position moving forward.
Knowing that knowledge is power, we always say this, but action is where real change happens. How can people use this tracker
Sure.
to get involved and make an impact?
Absolutely, right. So one of the great things about this tracker is that it helps to bridge the gap between policy and community, right? And particularly thinking about impact, right? So we're translating more complex language into very clear insights about how people can understand these executive orders and then what they can do. We provide some action steps that people can take in terms of helping to counter some of these. And I'm talking about everyday Americans, not just policymakers, even though it's for them as well. And so we really wanted to be able to arm everybody with this knowledge, as you're saying, to be able to use it in effective ways, right? Whether that's activists, researchers, educators, policymakers, of course, members of the Congressional Black Caucus and their and all the other people that work in Congress with them. But we wanted to be able to bring this information to them so they could use it and advocate for meaningful change in their communities and beyond. And so this tracker does a great job of being very interactive and fun and engaging to be able to bring that to people.
Dr. Cost, thank you so much for coming on the record. I don't always ask every single question, and I may forget something. So before we leave, I want to give you the last words. And what is it that you really want people to know as we end this conversation?
Sure. So we really want people to know that the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is a resource to Black communities and beyond, right? We want people to be able to come to us knowing that we are a trusted source of information in a time in which it can be difficult to often trust where you're getting your info from. And that we're continuing the work, right? Despite challenges that are ongoing, we are working very hard to ensure that Black communities have the tools they need, the knowledge they need, and the support they need to be able to thrive in America, and particularly in this ever-changing policy landscape.
I love it. Dr. Jonathan Cox, Vice President of the Center for Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Thank you for joining me on the record. You are always welcome back. And if there are any new updates, please let us know. In the meantime, I want everyone to go to the website, cbcfinc.org. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And make sure that you go look at that tracker so you can see what's happening in your very backyard. Thank you so much for joining me on the record.
Thank you for having me.